I'd like to insert a few simple shapes I can use. You might build your game with some simple objects for walls or surfaces, and then import more complex objects from a program like Blender. But just to add simple objects to your scene, you can go up to the Game Object menu, and then I'm going to go into 3D Object. And there's some objects here we can use: cube, sphere, capsule, cylinder. I think I'll just start by inserting a cube. And then this looks a lot like Blender, where you have little icons to move this in different directions. And I want to start to point out that if you look in the upper left corner, right underneath the menus, there's a few basic tools. So I'm actually in the Move tool at the moment. For example, if I click to hand, I won't see the little handles anymore. But I can go to Move, and if needed, I click to select the object, and then I can start to drag. If I pull the blue handle, it's moving it forward or backwards. The red handle to the side, and then green is up. You can also look at the gizmo in the upper right corner to see how it's labeled and the color coding for the different axes. One thing that's really different from Blender I want to point out is that the color coding and axis kind of feel different. They're oriented differently. I'm used to the blue Z handle pulling things up or down in Blender, but they're really using Z axis here to move it forward. So it's just, again, it's different from how the coordinates are labeled and operate in Blender. And you can always glance at the gizmo to kind of get oriented because it's labeled. I can see Z axis is blue. And in addition to move, you can start to look back to the upper left for more tools to manipulate these shapes. For example, I can click on rotate, and I can either drag just one of these colored circles to move it in one direction, or I can drag the outer circle to move in multiple directions. Or kind of another way to do that is to drag in between the axes to have more freedom of movement. And then I also want to point out, as you're manipulating this, it's recording measurements. So I can look at the inspector panel on the right while this is selected. So for example, as I was rotating, you can see it changing the values next to rotate. And it's also possible to enter in values over here on the right if you want to say reset something. Another way to work is I can use undo. Like I'm on Windows, so Control Z is going to be undo, and I can hit that repeatedly, or Command Z on Mac. So for example, I hit undo a few times to undo the rotations. And then to scale, I'll switch over to Scale tool. This should feel kind of easy again because it's really similar to how Blender operated out. So I can start to drag these handles to adjust size. I think I'm going to make this object feel like a floor. So I'm going to make it larger, and then I'll drag the green handle so it's a little more shallow in shape. And then I could start to add more components. I could go to Game Object, 3D Object, and insert another object. Maybe I'll put a cube in. And then I think I'll use Move tool and pull that one to the side. One other tool you might like is there's what I'll point at that you can click on that will let you move a bunch of different ways at one time. It'll let you move, rotate, or scale. And sometimes it's a little overwhelming to see all these different icons, but I think you can kind of figure them out quickly. Like the arrows are movements, the little squares are scaling. Maybe I'll make this wider. And then I can also drag the circles to rotate if I like. It's kind of a multi-purpose tool. And while you're in these transform tools, you can click to choose whichever object you want to work on. And maybe I'll go back to Move tool. I think I'll move this one up and then over. And by the way, one workflow that's popular to test a game or kind of prototype it early is to insert simple shapes through 3D object and then replace some of them later with objects from Blender. That's called gray boxing. You're kind of blocking out the game itself to do quick testing. Like maybe I insert a capsule, and then later this could be replaced with a Blender mesh that is a complicated character. But in some cases, people like to gray box, kind of block out the basic game elements. You could definitely also think of these objects as really convenient ways to build simple parts of your game that don't require more extensive detail. Like I might create things again like walls, floors, doorways, and then populate them with objects that come in from Blender. And I want to point out that each of these objects is being listed in the hierarchy panel underneath my scene name. And it's a really good idea to name these to be more organized, and it'll be easier as you add more objects to kind of understand what's going on. So I'm going to select this rectangle, and then I'll just go over to name it. So one thing that's kind of weird is double clicking on it is affecting the view size, but it'll also let me double click in order to highlight the name and type in things. So I'm going to go ahead and label this one floor. Maybe this one's going to become wall. And then the capsule, I'm going to replace that later with a character. So I think I'm just going to type in hero. So again, you want to be organized, give these names underneath the scene area. And then you can insert as many objects as you like. Quick way to zoom in and out, by the way, is to use the mouse wheel. If you have a 2-button mouse with a wheel in the center, it's one of the quickest ways to change view.